this is when things. This is where I made a lot of mistakes. To be really blunt about it, and I've been asked before.
Are you talking about me and Aaron now?
Yeah.
That wasn't Eric. The idea was Terry Taylor's. I've known that day one. Terry admitted it. Terry Taylor gave you that idea, Eric.
Yeah, and I don't recall. Oftentimes ideas are ideas take different kinds of shapes, and if Terry said he came up with it, that that's great, and it probably did. And ultimately, it was my decision, and I was the one who was responsible for what we did or we didn't do. So even though Terry, probably came up with the idea or did come up with the idea, ultimately it was my decision, and it's one of the things that I regret, because looking back, I didn't know it at the time, but now with the with perfect 2020 hindsight and the advantage that getting older does actually provide, one of the few, you can look back and see things differently and from a different perspective. And when I'm asked in interviews, but I always am, what do you regret? What's the one thing you would really change? There's too many things. There's, anybody that's been in business has made, usually you make about 51% of your decisions are good and 49% are bad. You can't look at your life in its totality in business and go, wow, every decision I made was good. If you are, then you're delusional. But from my perspective, going ahead with that idea, regardless of whose idea it was, is my responsibility whether we put it on the air or not. It was the wrong thing to do. And I didn't realize it at the time because, for me, I was so laser focused on one thing, and that was to keep the momentum going, that I asked people to do things without really understanding the negative impact it could have on them individually. And we haven't talked much about Arn Anderson, but Arn and Rick were very tight at that time, and maybe still, I don't know. But Arn had come off a neck injury. Arn was having trouble with his hand, I believe, Rick, at that time. That's when the injury first kind of occurred.
Yes.
And, I was young. Arn was young. And when you're young, or I was younger, I should say, but, when you're young, you don't think about things the same way you do as you start getting older. And for me, in my mind, I was thinking, well, I'm going to protect Arn. He's never going to have to worry about his job. Therefore, anything I asked him to do or be a part of, he should be willing to do it, because that's how I would have been. But I didn't put myself in Arn's shoes or in Rick's shoes or in anybody's shoes, and realize that for a guy like Arn Anderson, whose manhood, whose identity, whose profession, whose image, whose relationship with his audience, his livelihood, indeed most of his adult life at that time, was wrapped up in his ability in the ring. And that was now compromised because of his injury. So not only was he going through what I can only guess, because Arn and I have never talked about it, but now, as an older man, I can only imagine the kind of self-doubt and the negative, and just the doubt that would create in me. Just me. I don't know Arn that well. But I know if I was in Arn's shoes, I would have been having some serious, serious issues. But I didn't know that, and I didn't understand it, and I wasn't smart enough to think about it. So putting Arn in that position, and Rick, because of what else was going on with, the politics and the, positioning, and there was just there was a million moving pieces, and all of them were potentially explosive. But for me to put that out there, and whether it's a parody or not, whether it's life imitating art or art imitating life, it was a little too close to the bone, and it was disrespectful. And at the very least, even if it was the greatest idea in the world or it was the worst idea in the world, at the very least, it deserved me sitting down with those guys and saying, and one of those guys, I mean Rick and Arn and everybody else that was involved, and making certain that they were completely 100% on board with it. And I didn't do that. I just assumed. And that was a big mistake.
Eric, let me tell you where I'm at. And I was going to say this because I know this for a fact, and you may want to admit this, you may not want to, but I was there so much, and I don't like confrontation, as everybody knows, right? If I'm not having fun, I'm miserable. So I know how much, and this is where I'm at peace with myself. I know how many people you had to keep happy every day. And I know that all of them were saying, if you put Flair on there, we're never, it's out of sight. If we put Flair out there, we're never going to get rid of him. And I mean, that's where I'm at now. I've been on TV for, 47 years. I walk into an arena, they go, woo, right? And I say to Vince, why can't I be a GM? Because, you're 66 years old, you know what I mean? And they put you on a show once in a while, and it does well. And it's great exposure for me for what I'm doing now, to Comic-Cons and sign autographs. But I know that you were getting hit from every angle. I know what time the guys got there. I know the shows were rewritten 10 times. And I know at 7 o'clock, going to the 8 o'clock show, half the time you didn't know what you were doing. I don't mean you, but the powers that you had to, walk around at the divided locker rooms. You got, Sting and Luger in one and Bagwell. Then you got Kevin and Scott in another. Then you got, Kevin Sullivan. I don't know how he's alive today, hyperventilating, walking around. Yeah, as you know, right? And you got me and Arn over here who will do anything, right? But I found a way. I survived because I got, like Mongo came in. How much fun was Mongo?
Right.
And I figured to myself, if Mongo can let this robot back, because Scott Hall used to ride a Mongo, and I used to say to Scott Hall, you're going to get killed. This guy is legitimately tough. Would you not agree with that statement?
Yes.
That if Mongo got pissed off, he'd hurt somebody. And he used to ride. You remember how Scott would ride him, and I go, okay, man, this guy, but Mongo just rolled with it. He said, I'm having a good time. He said, I got more money than I